Hi everyone, this is my presentation on disaster tourism, and it's if it's breaking or beneficial. My thesis is that disaster tourism capitalizes on human suffering and environmental devastation by profiting from the loss and commodifying tragedy for entertainment, not only perpetuating harm to the affected communities, but also it desensitizes tourists to the real long-term impacts that disasters can have, which really undermines the efforts for genuine support and recovery. So, what is disaster tourism? Disaster tourism, also known as dark tourism or grief tourism, refers to the touring of sites that have been affected by natural or man-made disasters, like earthquakes, hurricanes, floods, war zones, or areas struck by simple industrial accidents. So some of the real impacts of disaster tourism is that it's detrimental to the mental health and well-being of the survivors of the disaster. It can hinder the efforts to rebuild a place affected by a disaster. It makes individuals involved in the disaster spectacles for society, and it desensitizes the audience to the true nature of the disaster. And it profits on loss, and even the most of the funds raised by the tourists, and what the tours they put on, rarely go to the actual recovery efforts for the disaster. It's usually just kept by the company that puts on the tour. So some of the benefits of disaster tourism that I found in my research were, while most people focus on the bad, there are benefits to disaster tourism, such as raising awareness to helping rebuild the community after a tragic event. I brought in a real-world example here about the new Twisters film, where you actually see both sides of the impact that disaster tourism has on the community. You have one side focused on just trying to prevent massive loss from tornadoes, which would be Kate and all of them going out and chasing just to see how to stop a tornado, to eventually be able to implement these tactics into stopping tornadoes for good and preventing the loss of homes and personal items. And then you have the other side of profiting on the loss and buying the land off of the people who lost some of their most important items in these tragic tornadoes. So this would be more like Javi and him trying to use his PAR radars for the 3D scan of the tornadoes to actually do more harm, because they partnered with a guy who is just buying land to turn it on his own profit rather than actually help the community. This movie focuses mainly on the good, by helping people rebuild society and getting people back on their feet again after fundraising, by fundraising for everybody and selling merch, and also handing out food after a tornado hits. This is a great example on how disaster tourism can be beneficial, because it really highlights a lot of the good things that people do, but they also really highlight the bad as well. So the counter argument is that disaster tourism helps rebuild and recuperate communities after tragedy, that disaster tourism helps raise funds for relief efforts, and disaster tourism brings awareness and makes people more aware of these terrible tragedies. The rebuttal to that is that although disaster tourism has its upsides, there are far more downsides to it. The Auschwitz Memorial is a place visited by hundreds of people who are just interested in kind of the shock and awe and seeing what damage Hitler did, instead of actually trying to help hear survivor stories and talk about it. And then another major visiting site for disaster tourism is the Chernobyl site. And after we all watched the video presented in class, we all know how hurtful it was and how it really did not help their community at all, and which really just enforces the fact that disaster tourism is mainly hurtful over helpful. And then for my conclusion, disaster tourism is bad for the environment and it depletes the natural resources that they need to rebuild, because it's just going to like people who don't really care. Disaster tourism fundraising rarely goes to the actual cause. You can see this a lot with like hurricane relief efforts and like how much money people put towards that and like their GoFundMes, because like GoFundMe is like, it becomes like such a big platform now that people use and like social media and all that, and it's rarely ever used for the actual cause. It's usually just brought back to the people that are fundraising it. So like that's like a really good thing to look at, like if you're ever considering donating to a cause, so really look at who you're sending your money to. Disaster tourism desensitizes people to tragedy. People are way more focused in like the shock and awe rather than the actual reasoning of like how this will affect people, how they'll get back on their feet, and all that. And then disaster tourism exploits survivors and makes them more of a spectacle rather than a survivor. I think this really goes to show, again, tying into like the mental health of the survivors of these attacks. It really just shows how much people don't care. Like they really just kind of want to like ogle at them instead of being like, "Are you okay? Like, how do you feel? Like, is there anything I can do to help?" Like, we just really don't care. We're just interested in seeing the damage. And then here is my final slide of a picture is worth 1,000 words and disaster tourism, because it is not helpful to us and it needs to be some sort of a change made in our society, that not all tourism is good tourism. And then here are my references for all of my research. And that is all. So thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed my presentation, and I look forward to seeing all of your guys's.